Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Shoot Your Shot Photography Show. My name is Ben Jacobson. Happy Friday. I hope you guys are doing well. If this is your first time joining us for the Shoot Your Shot Photography Show, welcome. This is a show where we sit down with photographers from all over the world and we discuss a variety of topics inside of photography. We share their work, we talk about their life experiences, and a whole bunch more. So, on that note, today we have a very special episode. We're going to be joined by Dylan Howell, who is a photographer and SEO specialist out of Portland, Oregon. So he is a fantastic photographer, but he's also a co-founder of Fuel Your Photos, which is an SEO course for photographers to help them rank their website better in Google search results. So we're super excited for that today. Again, if this is your first time joining us, we encourage you guys to ask any questions that you have. There's, of course, the comment section where you can ask any of those questions, and we'll do our best to answer those. But we're going to be going over we're going to lay the foundation of what SEO is, kind of explain to you guys why it's important, and then maybe give you some tips and tricks along the way in order to help your website rank a little bit better. So, Dylan, thank you so much for joining us again today. It's always an honor and a pleasure to get to talk with you. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what we're going to be talking about today.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on. I am a wedding photographer, and I've been shooting weddings for a bit over 10 years now. And I started my career in Boise, Idaho, where I met you, and then I moved over to Portland, Oregon. One of the main ways that I marketed myself early on was through SEO. And it was kind of one of my first marketing channels that I really dedicated some effort into. And even before I was a photographer, I was kind of into SEO as well. So through that whole process in the last 10 years, I've also done SEO professionally, consulted on some bigger companies and projects, and then started teaching SEO to photographers so they could implement the same strategies and techniques that I've used on other sites, on their own photography sites. And so a few years ago, I started working with Corey from Fuel Your Photos, and we partnered up together, and we created Fuel Your Photos SEO course. It's called Fuel Your Business. And so I think we have about 400 or 500 people that have done the course and seen some really good results, and we're super proud of it. So that's kind of the short story. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I am. You can count me among one of those 400 or 500 folks there. I actually have a background in SEO. I do marketing for a small SEO agency here, but just going through that course, it is extremely thorough, and I can definitely see why you guys are so proud of it. It looks like you guys have put in a whole bunch of work, and it definitely shows.
Thanks. Yeah. And I don't know how much I should say about it now, but we're in the process of completely redoing it, and excited for this will be like the third or fourth version, and it's gonna hopefully be the best yet.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's kind of jump into it a little bit today. And I wanted to start out just by laying kind of the groundwork and allowing everyone to make sure that we're on the same kind of equal level as far as understanding here. So tell us in really basic terms, what is SEO and why does it matter, or why should we care about SEO?
Yeah. So like the most basic definition, I guess, would be that you're trying to, I guess, optimize your site to show up in search engines as high as possible, organically. So you're not paying for the result. It's just when people do a search for wedding photographer, your site shows up. The primary search engine for photographers is Google. Bing, I wouldn't really count. Instagram is kind of a search engine. They've added a little bit of that to the search function of Instagram. YouTube is becoming much bigger for photographers. I've seen a lot of photographers kind of put more effort into that this year. But primarily what we're talking about is Google. And so why I think photographers should put some more effort into it, I think that it's one of the marketing channels that you can do on a budget. So you don't need to be spending $500 a month on ad spend. You don't need to be paying for like a expensive listing that might or might not drive actual inquiries. You just need to do a bit of work on the basic technical optimizations of your site, but mostly like creating content that's like really useful for users and part of their typical process of researching a photographer that they need to hire. So
Yeah, and I think you hit on something that I always kind of like really try to drive home, and that's you're not having to pay the $400 or $500 for ads. You're not having to pay for a listing inside of like a wedding registry type website. Um, it's something that works when you're not working, and it's something that works when you're not necessarily putting mountains of cash into it as well.
yeah, totally.
It's something that you can kind of bootstrap yourself. I think the currency for SEO is time and effort.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's really honestly probably the biggest hurdle for I think for most folks when they're getting involved with SEO for the first time, is just the actual O part, which is optimization. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it, and there's a lot of different tactics and approaches, and
Yeah.
all of them are pretty. I don't want to say daunting because I don't want to scare anyone off, because I think that the value of it is far outweighed than the amount of time and effort that you have to put into it. But I think most people look at something like Instagram ads and they say, oh, well, I can just run an Instagram ad and put $20, $30 behind it and see what happens. But long term, it's something that I think is more valuable than any ad spend that you could put forth in, unless you have very deep pockets.
Yeah, yeah. I, I do agree. I think that the upfront time commitment is something that when you're faced with the fact that you have to learn the subject and implement it, it can be a little bit daunting. Um, but if you trust that the results are going to be long term and that you could end up having 50 to 100 or more clicks to your site every day, day in and day out for years, then it becomes really worth it. And that's what I kind of love about SEO is that there's definitely some upkeep you have to do on your site, but you can have content rank for months or years at a time without any changes, which is kind of nice compared to like I think I post on Instagram once a month maybe, like, but like if I was posting every day, like it's so much work to come up with the content and the captions and the to do the interaction and hashtags and all that stuff. Like it's just too much for me to. And like if I was doing like 6 story posts a day in between those, like I don't know, that's to me that's work.
It
Writing a
is.
blog post every month isn't that hard.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you're putting forth that effort where you're posting every single day or you're posting 6 stories a day, like the the reach that you get on Instagram is squashed to a point to where it's I think a lot of people are really even like questioning like the validity of it, because it I mean you can get a fraction of a percent of views unless you're paying to boost your post. You can do certain things with hashtags. You can be, there's certain tips and tricks along the way, but I think just in general, social media, just your organic reach is going to be so hard to hit whatever their algorithm is that it's looking for specifically.
Yeah.
Whereas SEO, it's pretty tried and true. I think that there's varying schools of thought, but like for the most part, like it pretty much continues to work. You're not having to post every single day. You're not having to, do upkeep and try to find the perfect hashtags and everything like that every single time. It's something that once you build it, it takes a lot of time, but once you build it, it's something that will continue to run in perpetuity.
Yeah, totally.
And um, one of the other things too is just simply taking the amount of time to understand, like you were mentioning, like you're not just having to implement SEO. It's not just, hey, do this thing, this thing, this thing, and you're done. You're also having to test a lot. And so with that, I mean, we often tell our clients, like, and anyone that's getting into SEO, like, look for long-term results. Like, you shouldn't start to really, I mean, hopefully you see it before then, but typically you're looking at like 3 months before you're seeing like any noticeable difference in your traffic. And I think that maybe kind of deters a lot of people because let's face it, we're creatures of instant gratification.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, think that's a really good point, and we try to iterate that as often as possible as well, where there can be quick wins. Like I see that on some projects, but they're far from guaranteed. And I'm really all about that 3, 6, 9 months, 1 year out. Like, where do you want to be in 2 years? Like, it's hard because it's hard for, I think, photographers to get their mind around that long game. Um, but for me, if I could tell myself that in 2 years I would have a constant stream of inquiries that are enough to like just book me out, and so I don't have to worry about other marketing channels. That's typically that's a good situation to be in, I think.
That's a great spot to be in.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think anyone that just has automatic inquiries coming in, and I think that's the part that really, like, people, their eyes light up a little bit when you start explaining that concept of like, what would it be like if you didn't have to worry about trying to gain leads from Instagram? I know that there's some folks that out there that swear by Instagram and they do great and they just crush it with solely on Instagram, but
Oh, totally.
it's so much work, like you were talking about before. And if you can have something that's just kind of running in the background, and we'll get into this hopefully in a little bit, but like just actually serving like a real intent and like a real purpose to whoever's searching on the web, like that's a 2-for-1 in my opinion. Like you're getting leads and you're actually doing something that's like adding to the benefit of the community and to the world, rather than just trying to, spam people with Instagram posts or something like that.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, we can definitely go down that route whenever you're ready for that discussion. But
So one thing that I wanted to talk about is I think we've kind of started talking a little bit about the importance of the SEO. One thing that, as I was preparing for this episode specifically, one thing that I wanted to really hammer home that I think will drive the importance of where you're ranking on your site is just the drop off inside of the search engine results page from position to position. So for those who may not be familiar, when you search for something, let's say you're looking for a dentist, if you go up and you open up Google and you search dentist near me, who shows up at the top is basically going to be most likely an effort of their SEO. If you're showing up in the number 1 spot, likely you are the most optimized or the best result for whatever that person was searching for. The very top spot, if you can optimize and you can get that top one, I found here was 32.5%. is the average of the traffic share of when someone searches for something. So let's say 1,000 people search for a dentist in Boise, Idaho. 32% of those people are going to click on the very first link. And then it just drops off from there. The second is like 17%. The third's 11%. So as you go down, it significantly starts really dropping off. So being able to like slowly work your way up and like make these minute adjustments over time, I think is really where people are going to start seeing, if you start getting into some of those top spots and you're ranking for, more specific keywords, that's where you can really start to get some of those big wins.
yeah, the click-through rate curve is such an interesting concept, and I think I've done a lot of data analysis on this across different industries and different types of websites and different types of queries, and what kind of results are showing up for those queries. But specifically to photographers, what I've kind of found is that for a lot of like the main key terms that people are targeting, typically it's like their location and then their specialty and photographer or photographers. So like Boise wedding photographer, Portland wedding photographer, that kind of term. There's some interesting dynamics with how searchers interact with those search results. They seem to go much deeper in those results than you would expect.
Interesting.
So like the click-through rates on page 6 are way higher than you would expect.
Really?
But yeah, and it's like, it doesn't make much sense. But I will also say that those clicks are somewhat meaningless because I don't see the corresponding inquiries typically from that same traffic. I think that those are typically users that are getting their like very early information on the topic. They're just trying to figure out like the lay of the land, like who are the photographers in that area. They're not ready to even contact them yet. They might not even be engaged or planning a wedding yet. So it's really interesting. Um, and then I found some more detailed information or like more detailed queries. We have an example in our course where Corey did a post about date night ideas for pregnant couples. It's like just
Yeah.
a random topic he wanted to build some content around just to show the whole research process and that he could compete with his site up against really like high authority sites like I'm trying to remember like Cosmopolitan or something like that had an article about that. But he's getting 30% click-through rate from position 3, which is
Wow.
way higher than it should be for position 3.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And
That's
it's
very
because
surprising.
yeah, and it's because he really nailed the actual intent and he made a title that I think is really convincing that people should click on it. Plus, I think maybe people kind of know what to expect from the big magazine type article where it's like, yeah, that's a fluff article with a catchy headline and not much actual information, so that they're willing to give his site a chance. So yeah, it's click-through rate stuff's endlessly interesting, and I kind of like to leave it like further down in the end of the SEO process. Like once you get your site ranking and you're in the first 2 or 3 pages, then I really like to start tweaking titles to see like, hey, can I get a 50% increase in this click-through rate from like 0.75 to 1.5 or to 1 or something like that? And that's a huge increase in the actual number of clicks.
Yeah.
Or if you could go from 1% to 4 or 5%, like that's you're 5xing your clicks, and it's a really fun part of SEO for me.
So if I'm a person tuning in and listening to this and I'm saying, okay, great, I want to get started on this, like, of
Yeah,
course, let's get to number one position here. So what
totally.
are what are some of the ranking factors? Like, let's just try to keep it high level. Like, what are some of the things that Google is looking for, and why do some sites rank better than others?
Yeah, I would say that there's two like the two pillars I think of when I visualize the Google algorithm in my head. The first one would be they're trying to figure out, is this person or site or entity a trustworthy and authoritative source of information? Is this a place where people actually go to find answers, or is it just like a spam site or something? Um, so there are metrics that are going into that, reviews of the people online, backlinks, the other other content that they have online, things like that, other mentions of their brand from other authoritative sites. Like if New York Times mentions my name, my content's probably going to start ranking better. Um, so that's like the authority side. And then what I think is becoming more apparent in the algorithm or a bigger factor would be the actual content quality side. I think Google's getting better with their natural language processing to have their algorithm, their computer, like their crawlers, everything like that, just understand content as they crawl and index the internet. So they're able to look at an article now and make a really decent guess if it's written by a bot, if it's written just with somebody with poor grammar and poor skills, or if it's written by somebody that is a quality writer and they're backing up what they say with actual citations and sources, and it's actual content that's believable and that the public trusts and should trust. Um, and then also like the other huge part of that is like they're trying to figure out the intent behind the search. So what is this searcher actually trying to solve, or what question are they trying to answer? Uh, and does this content actually solve that problem for them? And they're able to kind of do that with machine learning and stuff. They're also able to really do that with looking at their huge amount of analytics and data on how people are bouncing back to the search or doing multiple queries in a row and what sites they're visiting, things like that. So
Yeah. So they're basically, so the way that I'm understanding it is they're essentially looking for the authority of the site to make sure that it's like something that's genuine, something that is serving a real purpose on the web. It's a person writing it, someone who's a skilled writer, and then additionally, it's also trying to match what the searcher's intent is and making sure that it's going to be a viable solution for whatever someone's searching for.
Exactly.
How do like, let's say I'm a photographer and I am now hearing that and I'm saying, okay, well, I want to, of course, write information that's going to be relevant. What sort of things are you seeing that like are often what we as photographers overlook if we're not familiar with SEO? Like, for
Yeah,
example, I often see like blog posts where it's like a beautiful session that someone shot, and it's got, 4 or 5 sentences at the top kind of describing it and not much else.
totally. I mean, that used to be like the go-to playbook, and it worked for so long where like you could just put the term you're trying to rank for in the title of the blog post and maybe in the URL, and maybe write a sentence and be like, this was a beautiful day at whatever venue, and it would rank for that. Um, it's become much more competitive. And I think also Google's looking for just better information. And there's so much new information published every day that they're only going to really care and index and want to promote a sliver of that. So things you can do would be, I mean, it's never a bad idea to link to authority sites, almost as like citations. But so like for the photographer, if they're doing a session at a certain park, it wouldn't be a bad idea to link to that park's official website and just be like, hey, like if you're interested in shooting at this park, here's their website with contact information and permit and whatever FAQs like there are about that spot. That can be just a simple, easy trick to ranking better. Also, like if there are any other mentions or local like related entities that would be associated with that, like you could talk about, like you could link to the city's official website for the city that the park's in, or the county or the state or whatever. You could mention a local landmark that's nearby and associated with it. You can mention famous people that have also been in that park. I don't know, just like dumb stuff like that. One simple thing to do is like a map search for the entity you're writing about, if it's a location or something, and see what else is showing up, and maybe mention a few of those locations, things like that. Like the Dairy Queen around the corner or something. I don't know, just things like that. Like you're looking at to try to hack together what Google thinks are relevant entities to what you're writing about. You can also look at, like, do a search for the term you're trying to rank for and see what's showing up in related searches, what's showing up in people also asked.
Yeah,
Yeah, stuff like that.
I think all of those are like really hugely important. I think what I always bring it back to and boil it down to is if I put yourself in the shoes of the person that's actually doing the Google search. So let's say that you're getting married and you're looking for a wedding photographer, or you're looking for an elopement photographer. If you're out there and you're actually looking for someone to fulfill this need that you have, and you land on a website and it's like, hey, guess what? I'm a elopement photographer, and here's a couple shots that I did. Like, great. It gives me a pretty good idea. And photography, I think, is unique in that the product is very visual. So oftentimes I think that we mistakenly think that just the photos will do all the work. Like, they'll sell what we're selling for us. And what I've found is, being in the position that I am currently looking for a photographer. So if I look and I say, okay, well, this person's shot in this same spot that I actually am wanting to get married at. Let's say it's a national park, and to your point earlier, like linking to that national park and answering those other questions that might be related to what else they already have in mind. So let's say I want to get married in the Redwoods. If you want to get married in the Redwoods, there's more to it than just getting your wedding photographer in place. Finding out that if I search for a photographer that does elopements in the Redwoods, and they have all of the information for what to do there, not just, hey, I've done this and here's some pictures, but like, here's information about getting your permits, here's dates that are available, here's how to contact these people, here's other things you might want to consider. Like, that does a number of things to me as a searcher. It makes me realize that person has like a pretty good idea of what they're talking about. Like they're well researched, they've done it before, and it really just like adds to that authority metric, like the human authority metric that makes me feel better about wanting to go with this person as a provider. And I think that Google has done a pretty good job of understanding that same concept and turning that into its algorithm and saying, hey, what pages and what websites are actually helping people with their search result more than just what they're asking for. And so that kind of like starts getting into like the searcher intent area of kind of what we were talking about before.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I mean, it's your chance to make yourself the expert and really show that authority. And I mean, I think it's kind of night and day. I can tell when people find me through some of my older work, that's some of those older blogging techniques where it's just like, here's some pretty photos in a pretty place and it has very minimal actual like content. They might be like, hey, yeah, we found you through this. We'd love to get your pricing or whatever. But when they find me through like my guide to eloping in Big Sur or something like that, they're like, hey, thank you for putting the guide together. We talked to this venue, like we want to shoot in this spot. Thank you for the permit information. Like they're so appreciative that I've helped them so much through the process of planning that elopement, that in their mind, there's no reason to even look for other photographers because I'm the expert. I do it all the time. I've shot there 20, 30, 40 times or something. Like, it's just, yeah, it makes it an easy decision for them. And it makes my job easier, my life easier,
Yeah.
because then if they do book, I don't have to be like answering emails that are like, hey, like, so what do we do about permits? Like, I just had to write that information once and they can refer to that. And obviously I can help them, but like, uh, I end up not getting the questions like, okay, we figured out permits. Now where should we stay? All right, so what other activities could we do, or like which airport should we fly into? And like I don't know, it's I think it's really easy for me to make those guides once and not have to do that with every client.
Yeah. And it does something too. I mean, even for talking outside of SEO, it gives you like an advantage from a marketing perspective because again, it's like you said, why would they go with someone else? Like you've already demonstrated and given away so much value in what you're offering that they're like, yeah, man, if this is what I'm getting for free, like I can't imagine like what kind of value I'm going to get out of, working with this person.
Exactly.
And I think that's huge. I think that just being able to go out there and continue to provide more information than what people are directly asking for just sets you up in such a good position to really blow them away. The phrase I always go back to is under promise and over deliver. Like
Yeah.
you really want to blow them away. And if you've already won them over by getting them to click on your website, to click on your elopement guide, like you're doing great because they're already on your site and that's half the battle. But if you have this opportunity in this first impression to really blow them away, like give them everything they need. Like show them that, and this is especially helpful when you're talking about building out like wedding planning guides or elopement guides or um, you know hometown venues. Like
Oh,
these sorts of things, if you can provide enough value to where they're like, well, even if I didn't want to use this photographer, I'm kind of considering it now because everything else that they've done has been so helpful and been so on point. And that's another part of it is it has to be accurate, it has to be up to date, it has to be, like good information that
for
people are
sure.
actually looking for because you can fill it with a bunch of fluff. And if you say there's also an Arby's nearby, like
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
might not matter. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it is. Maybe they have a huge thing for Arby's and they just love it. But I mean,
Yeah.
for the most part, it's like, talking about what airport you're flying into, where you're staying, how to get around, what other things you can do outside of your wedding event. Like, those are massively valuable things. And it just continues to add to your authority inside of that space.
Yeah, totally.
So, if we're talking about, we've been kind of talking about guides a little bit here,
Yeah.
and we touched on blog posts. We've talked a little bit about kind of what old tactics were and how people used to blog and how that's changed. So if I'm a photographer now, I just shot an engagement session, I'm super stoked about it, and I'm going to go blog it. What sort of things should I be paying attention to as I'm going through and putting this blog together um, in order to make sure that I'm providing something that is going to be what people are looking for and it's also searchable?
Yeah, totally. I think doing basic keyword research, there are really nice paid tools like Ahrefs and SEMrush, and KW Finder by Mangools is one that we have been using lately that's really inexpensive and quite good. Uh, you can use tools like that to see, like, are people searching for anything related to this information? So this place that I shot the engagement session at, are people ever going to like Google like foothill Boise engagement? Maybe. Camel's back engagement? I don't know. They might. And so you kind of need to see, like, is there demand? So like do that little bit of research. Um, if you don't have access to those tools, there's a really cheap one called Keywords Everywhere. It used to be free. They've made it so it's like, I don't know, $10 in credits will probably last you 6 months or a year. So it's almost free. Um, if you don't have access to that, you might have to just guess and then get the post ranking and see what kind of impressions you're getting for the term later down the road. But for a term like it, or for a something like an engagement session, I'd be thinking to myself, unless this is a location that's really high traffic or really high demand, I'm almost better off doing a post that's like 15 best engagement session locations in Boise, Idaho, and having this be one of them. If you don't have something like that on your site and you're trying to shoot engagement sessions, that's the content you should be concentrating on. And then if once you do have that like top 15 engagement session location list on your site, you could treat this individual shoot almost as more of a portfolio, and then try to target maybe some very specialized niche term that only has a small number of searches per month. And it's not really going to be like a business changer, but it's just going to be ranking for some topic. And it could be based on like what the couple was wearing or what time of day or the exact park or area that the engagement session was taught in or shot in.
Yeah.
But
So, so for something like that, it's almost like you're wanting to build like kind of a pillar to base everything else around. So like something like you create a post that's 15 best engagement spots around Boise, Idaho. So you'd create that and create this list. Would you then link to these smaller, more individual, more specific engagement session blog posts,
yeah,
or how, or are you just including that inside of your longer list?
yeah, you could totally link from the main like pillar post out to the little hub posts. That internal linkings can be quite powerful. I just, for pretty much in almost all markets, engagement shoots don't really drive that much traffic. So I don't worry too much about them. It's just like a random side tangent. But and so like my individual posts, I treat those as portfolio. They're useful once all the people come to your location shoot guide or engagement location list. Just having the options for them to click through and see like, oh yeah, this person's versatile. They're able to shoot in the desert and in the city and like in the mountains, and they have all these different locations and their work looks great. So you're just kind of treating it as portfolio with less, I guess, expectation that it's going to drive like a ton of traffic on its own, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So what about like more of the specific like on-page
Yeah.
optimization? So I think as photographers, one of the things that we see is, we go into the back end of WordPress and we're looking at, you know, there's a number of things like, image optimization.
Yeah.
If we were to go through like image optimization inside of WordPress, like how much attention should we be paying to those sorts of things, and what should we actually be taking notes of or doing with with those images?
Totally. So images, it's going to be a tiny bit website specific. Just talk to whoever designed your site or built your theme to see like which image widths they recommend for your content. Although if it's all set up correctly, especially with WordPress, it should be resizing and creating the right thumbnail sizes and doing everything correctly. So sizing out of the way, what you really need to pay attention to is compression. And my favorite tool for that is called Short Pixel, and I use the glossy setting, and they have a WordPress plugin that will go through your entire WordPress image library and compress every photo. The reason that's important is that Google doesn't really care as much about how large the image is from a pixel dimension, but they do really want to make sure that you're compressing them a lot so you're not wasting people's bandwidth. And so they'll kind of penalize you. It's been a while since I've had this happen to my site, but I had a blog post where all of the photos were just like, they must have been saved at 100 quality or something. Like every photo was, I can't remember how big it was, but it was like 6 megabytes or something. I don't know, just like stupid. And I had probably 100 photos and none of them were lazy loaded. And so it became an issue where at some point Google was like, this should no longer rank, because I think I was ranking first for the term, and all of a sudden my rankings went away, and I was trying to diagnose what happened. But I compressed all of the images on that page, and I don't even think I was lazy loading at the time. I just compressed them, and I went from like position 90 to position 2 or 3 like overnight.
Oh,
so
wow.
It was like just compressing the images fixed that problem. Since then I have pretty much became convinced that lazy loading is the right way to go for photographers, because lazy loading has become much better from a user experience than it used to be. And most of the browsers now have lazy loading built in. So I think that for images, just compress them, turn on lazy loading, you're good there. And then from actual like ranking and image search, it's really like the title of the page that the images are showing up on is important, the content surrounding the images. If Google can't figure out what the image is with that information, they might have to look at like the file name and the alt text. But I'm not a fan of just like spamming alt text specifically and really file names with the keywords you're trying to rank for. And then in general, I found that the image search for photographers is quite low and converts really, really poorly in comparison to web search. So I don't spend a ton of time on my image optimization. I might optimize definitely the photos on your homepage, and then maybe a few, like 1 or 2 or maybe 5 photos for every page or blog post you do maximum. Don't spend time going through hundreds of photos on your site trying to like adjust the file names and alt text just for image ranking.
For sure. So when you're going through and you're putting in these blog posts, where you have something that has a whole mess of photos in there, and you got 100 photos or so, what sort of like content should you be writing inside of those blog posts that you think that could be valuable? Do you because like even like we talked about, where this might be more of kind of a hub and spoke model, where you have like your hub, which is the 15 best wedding venues in your hometown, and then each one that's more specific is kind of dialed down.
Yeah.
What are you seeing, like there's a best practice for like what to include on those more individual blog posts? Like, should we be writing like a certain amount? Is there like should we be trying to like use keywords inside of that content, or what sort of things should I be paying attention to as well as I'm creating those individual blog posts?
Yeah, totally. It's hard. So in our course, we have a section called the blogging course, and we created this document that kind of walks through what we think should be included in any page you're trying to rank for a certain topic. And it's hard. I rarely blog from the perspective of like, I just did a shoot, how can I leverage that shoot? I'm typically coming more from the side of, I've done some keyword research and I've identified a bunch of opportunities in my area based on my specialty, and then I want to try to create content around those. And so I'm almost never trying to like wedge a recent shoot into like one of those opportunities. I'm kind of going in the opposite direction, trying to like create content for the opportunities. But if I had to just like create a blog post based on like a wedding venue or something like that, I'd probably say you're going to want to use the wedding venue in the page title and probably in the URL. That's always been good advice, and it's always worked out for me. You're probably going to want to create a heading structure based on people also asked and related searches. So it might be, if it's a wedding venue, like how many people, what kind of capacity, what kind of cost range, where is it located, how to get there, all that sort of stuff. And put those into headings in a structure that makes sense, hierarchical. So like your main topics in your H1 and subtopics are H2s, and subtopics below that are in H3s. That all kind of helps. Having some optimized images helps. And then linking out to those authority sites and related entities. That's kind of like the basics, I guess. But yeah, I think that's kind of what I would do.
Yeah, and I think that all of those are really solid. I think that as you're going through it, I think the same thing kind of applies. And this is, again, I kind of have a few mantras inside of SEO, but like design for like what's going to be beneficial to people. Like if you have a recent wedding post and you're including this into your SEO strategy and you're saying, all right, great, I'm going to go through, I'm going to blog this wedding and it's going to have these keywords and these phrases in my H1s, my H2s, they're going to be subdivided out into more specific, more niche areas of like what we're talking about, and just having that overarching strategy to where you can actually, if you bullet point out a few of these things and just write in a little bit more information about each of those, I've found that it gives a better intent for, or not a better intent, it gives a better experience for the searchers and for people that are on your site. I think that like oftentimes we get afraid of writing too much. We all have seen the recipe websites that, talk about the whole life story before getting to the final ingredients. But there's a reason that some of that stuff exists, not all of it, but there's value in adding a little bit extra relevant content. Be smart about what you're adding in there, but having an additional piece of relevant content inside of there is just making your piece more valuable. You don't want to go too far off topic. You don't want to do anything like that. But I think having more information about, here's how to get in touch with this venue, here's the wedding coordinator there. Like, think of what those people might also be looking for and do a little bit more research there, which you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but one of the really solid ways, or one tip to find out what else people are actually looking for, is just use Google itself.
Yeah.
Start doing Google searches for wedding photographers in Boise wedding photographers. Start mixing some of those keywords around, switching the order of them, and seeing what shows up. And then also one of the biggest things is there's a box that says people also search for. Use that, because that's one of the few things that I was reading something about it, but it's like one of the few things that doesn't have, like, it's not, I can't remember the specifics of it, but like it's supposed to be like a pretty raw feed of like what else people literally search for that search for that same phrase. And so using Google itself to figure out what else is available out there and see what your competitors are doing. Start doing searches for their websites and seeing what things that they're ranking for too.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like most content you can just create simply with Google alone. The third-party tools are really helpful, and they can really help you like building a content strategy, but they're just, there's so much information just Google's handing you with every search.
Yeah. So if I'm getting started, let's say I think that the people that I've talked to, there's a couple different camps. It's either people that are like, yep, I know SEO, I know what I'm doing, I've at least gone through and optimized as much as I can understand or as much as I have time to optimize. And then there's a couple people that I found that are like, oh yeah, I've I know I need to do SEO, and I haven't really spent the amount of time or the effort necessary in order to do it, and they're kind of starting fresh.
Yeah.
Um, for those folks, what sort of things would you? I know this is maybe a little too broad here, but like, what sort of things would you start out with, as far as like, okay, tools? Like, I'm thinking setting up like Google Search Console, like
Yeah.
Google Analytics. What sort of like basic steps do you recommend in order to at least just kind of get a basic understanding of where you're at to begin with?
Totally. So we have a free like SEO challenge. If you go to failurephotos.com/SEO challenge, and it kind of walks you through a 7-day process to just like jumpstart, get going with your SEO. And like you said, day one is setting up Google Search Console. Set up Google My Business if you don't have that already. Analytics are great. We dive really straight into like kind of a technical fix, but like something that should be pretty simple to wrap your head around with, which is indexation, um, making sure that your site's indexed properly and that you don't have problems with having too many pages indexed or pages that you need to be indexed, not indexed, things like that. So that's a pretty decent spot. We also have our free SEO guide, which is just failurephotos.com/SEO for photographers. That is kind of our brain dump of just like, here's everything you really need to know for SEO, like at a basic level for a photography site. But even that like might be too much. Like Moz is a really good resource. They have a free SEO guide. It's pretty basic, but it's really good information, well written, well researched and up to date. So yeah, I think any of those are like good starting points.
So if you're starting to go through and get some of this up and going, we talked about it a little bit earlier on, but expecting like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year down the line, in order to see these results. That's kind of what we're looking at, like long term. But like, what kind of time commitment should we be expecting for maybe kind of the introductory phase, like getting everything up and going, and then also what kind of like maintenance does this look like?
Yeah.
Because we talked about the struggle of posting daily on Instagram or on Facebook or whatnot, but like, what sort of upkeep do you notice when you're working on your own site versus also someone who's just starting out?
Yeah, totally. So the upfront time is going to kind of vary depending on what platform you're on and how in depth you want to go and how much web design experience you have, or if you're just like completely starting from scratch, simple things might take you some time. But it's not a huge time commitment. Like the basic setup of a photography site is like deciding what to target with your homepage and putting that in the title, and like some basic tweaks that make sure that your other pages aren't competing with your homepage, and that your blog posts are generally set up right. And so like the one-time setup might take you a day, but it's not a lot. After that, the content can also widely vary, but we've noticed that like you should be able to do a really quality blog post in a week. And that's not a week of just working on it like 40 hours, but probably I would say 20 hours would be like a really well-researched blog post from start to finish, from the ideation phase, keyword research, creating the content itself, formatting it, publishing it, and then a little bit of work after publishing as well. But I would say 20-ish hours would probably be a decent goal there. And I think you just need to know that not all of the content on your site needs to go through that full process, and that we've seen photographers that maybe spent a lot of time on 2 pages on their site or 5 pages on their site that are written to that level, but they drive all of their traffic, or they just drive enough traffic that they don't need to worry about more content creation. And some of them, like I think we had one photographer on our course, the main piece of content on their site is a wedding venue guide, but they took the time to go to all of the venues that were featured. They took photos, they met with the people that ran the venue, but doing that kickstarted their entire like business, like as far as like marketing goes. They had the personal relationships with those people that ran the venues, then referring them. The guide ranked statewide and for all of the venues specifically, and it was enough traffic to give them a ton of inquiries every month, like more than they could ever book. So
Wow,
um,
that's awesome.
yeah, so it's like you kind of do this work and then I wouldn't say you coast, but like I like to look at my best content maybe every 6 months, and just make sure it's up to date still. See if there's any tweaks, if there's any competition coming in, like making sure that I'm still better than them as far as content quality goes. And even simple things like every year making sure that maybe some of the venues went out of business or have changed their name or have changed their contact info, and just making sure that's up to date. And when you do those updates, you can kind of also update like, here's the best guide for 2021, and now it's the best guide for 2022, and like that sort of thing. So there's a little bit of upkeep, but it's not super significant.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, and I think that just really kind of summarizes everything. It's a different way of putting the work in. I think that again we're creatures of instant gratification, and so we're always wanting to see those results. But I think if you can take that leap and trust the process long enough to put in a few months worth of work, I think that something like that, where you're talking about some of these guides that are bringing in exceptional amounts of leads, I think that that's within grasp for a vast majority of folks. As long as your work is on point, your website is serving the right purpose, and you're following through with making sure that you're serving the user's intent, I think that it could be a valuable thing for just about anyone to have, even if you're not a wedding photographer or even a photographer in general. But just again, having these pillar types of content that drive great leads from people that are just looking for more information.
Yeah.
It's huge. I think it could be extremely valuable for so many people. We are already at the top of the hour. I had a couple more questions here, but I think we pretty much covered just about everything that I wanted to.
Awesome.
That was awesome. I'm surprised that we got through so much of that.
Nice.
Awesome. So we're going to put links to Fuel Your Photos in the show notes down below as well. But if you guys are interested, like I can personally vouch, like I've gone through this course and already having a background of SEO, this is extremely well put together. And as Dylan says, it sounds like they're working on even some more updates. So it's just always gaining in value. I encourage you guys to go check that out if you are curious at all. I believe you have like a group that goes along with it, right, too, to help answer questions and things like that?
Yeah, totally. So we have a free SEO group on Facebook if you search for Fuel Your Photos, but we also have a VIP group for the course members, and that's where they can ask questions at any time, and we try to answer those as quickly as possible. And we do monthly hangout Zoom calls with the course members, and that's also a great Q&A time, and we can look at each other's sites and what they're working on and just have a good chat.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, Dylan, I appreciate you taking the time today. Again, that was fantastic. I really hope that you guys gain some information about SEO, and hopefully you can do a few of these tweaks to help your site rank a little bit better and outrank your competitors too. So
nice.
Dylan, thanks again. I appreciate it. We'll have to do this again. It was a blast.
Totally. Thanks for having me, and talk again soon.
Awesome. Have a good rest of your night. I'll talk to you guys later.